Since our girls are starting kindergarten next year, my buddies and I have been debating the pros and cons of different schools. I told them about a new Spanish immersion program nearby, thinking they'd be psyched. But Bill says, I had plenty of trouble in school without doing it in Spanish. Plus my wife says we wouldn't fit in since we don't speak Spanish. I was sure Jose would be hot on a Spanish program, but he said, I went to one of those programs when I moved to the US, but Rosa already speaks English. The first bilingual schools were actually started in the US by Polish immigrants in the 1600s. Today, there are many kinds of language-focused schools in the US. There are bilingual schools for kids with limited English skills. These schools teach kids in their native tongue as a bridge to learning English. The bridge can be short, fast-tracking kids into all English, or long, kids learning in 2 languages over several years. Then there are immersion or dual language programs. The goal of these programs is for students to leave high school completely biliterate. And of course, some traditional schools teach second languages as one of many academic classes. All kids benefit from speaking more than one language, and learning a second language when young actually develops brains in powerful ways. Not all language programs are right for all kids. Children with language-related disabilities may have a tough time with immersion programs. And they're not right for every parent either. Helping with homework can be challenging. But language programs are worth considering. I convinced my friends to visit the school to find out what would be the right fit for their children. And you should too. Do your research. Explore greatschools.org to learn about language-based schools in your area, and then consider visiting one yourself.
What are the benefits of bilingualism? And in fact, there are an extraordinary number of them. On a very personal level, what that can do to enrich a person, on opening new doors, opening new horizons, giving people new opportunities.
We're in a very exciting phase of time where it seems there's an added value for a youngster who has the opportunity to learn through 2 languages, which is not immediately available to the child who only learns through 1 language.
There are also a lot of other benefits to be gained, for instance, health benefits. We know from a study done by Białystok 2007, and there have been a few studies since then, that point to a distinct bilingual advantage. If one thinks of the bilingual brain as being like the national grid of a country, the electric grid, and the more sophisticated the grid is, the more unlikely one is to suffer a power outage if something goes wrong in part of the grid.
The benefits of being bilingual. Here's one of my friend's favorite jokes. What do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 2? Bilingual. And what do you call someone who speaks just 1? An American. Corny, right? Well, the joke is actually grounded in some truth. Only 18% of Americans can speak a language other than English, whereas 53% of Europeans can speak more than 1 language. And 99% of Latvians can speak more than 1 language. So why are we so bad at learning other languages? It has long been thought that learning a second language too young can hinder a child's intellectual development, which is part of the reason foreign language lessons start in 6th or 7th grade in many schools across the US. We now know that being bilingual actually has many beneficial side effects and grows many parts of the brain at a young age. We also know that it's much more difficult to become fluent in a language learned after puberty than a language you learn as a young child. So here are some of the many benefits and few drawbacks of acquiring a second language at a young age. Early researchers thought if a person obtained a second language too early, the 2 language systems would obstruct each other, making it more difficult to master either, and making a person worse at both languages. They were only partially wrong. Turns out, one language system can indeed obstruct the other in early years. However, researchers are now finding that this process forces the brain to strengthen its cognitive muscles to resolve this internal conflict, essentially making us smarter and making our brains stronger. Researchers have found that the minds of bilinguals are better at adapting to changing stimuli than the minds of monolinguals, especially at a young age. Scientists think that's because the brain's command center, which is responsible for problem solving, planning, and directing one's attention, is more nimble in bilinguals than it is in monolinguals. So what are the drawbacks? Well, scientists say that monolinguals tend to have a wider vocabulary as children than bilinguals, and are able to more quickly access the words they are looking for. However, most bilinguals are able to catch up with vocabulary acquisition at a later age. Science has also found a few other benefits of speaking more than one language. One study showed that dementia set in an average of 4 years later in bilinguals than it did in people who speak only one language. Another showed that bilingualism is equated with a 2.8% increase in hourly wages. Aside from all that science, speaking more than one language is great because you can make friends with more people, which is always a good thing.